Hi, I'm Jo. I'm a member of the Paradox Comics group, and I recently got the opportunity to sit down with Matt Rosenberg, Marvel Comics writer, to talk about his new comic, Hawkeye Freefall. I hope you enjoy it. So, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your comics heritage, as it were. I
Mhm.
wanted to ask you what your first comics memories are, and also what you're reading right now.
Sure. Um, so, my first comics memories are, I think it's a very sort of classic comics origin story. I have an older brother,
Uh huh.
and he read comics. I don't know what got him into comics, but he told me I absolutely was not allowed to touch his comics or go in his room and look at them. So, of course, as soon as he would step out the door, that was the first thing I would do. And literally my first comics memories are me being 3 and 4 and trying to read his X-Men comics and like sounding out the words and trying to figure out what's going on and just being so fascinated by all of it. Um, and so that to me, like it's a memory that I really, you have those memories from when you're young that are really visceral, that you really like hold on to. And I remember just sitting there like staring at these words and these balloons and pictures and trying to figure out, this what all of this was saying and what it meant. And
Wow.
I'm still trying to do that. So and yeah, it just never sort of went away from me. I grew up, there was a comic book store on my block growing up. So that was like my home base, and I would go there every day after school. And um, it went from reading my brother's comics to, excuse me, it went from reading my brother's comics to sort of saving up and getting my own, and I just never stopped reading comics. So it's sort of been a constant from that when I was 4 to now. Um, and uh, what am I reading now? Was the other?
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, I read every day. I read comics every day.
Hmm.
Uh, a lot of times I'm reading stuff for work. So uh, what I read is very weird and odd because I have to research things. I've been reading a ton of the 1980s Mark Grunwald Captain America stuff lately, which is so good. I love it so much. I read it when I was a kid and haven't like read it, revisited it in bits and pieces, but now I'm just like going straight through and it's awesome. I'm really loving that. Trying to think what else has been great. Kelly Thompson's Captain Marvel has been awesome. I've
Yeah.
been really liking that. Crowded from Image, that's a book I really love that I've been reading.
Cool.
What else have I read recently? I just finished reading The Walking Dead. Um, I was buying it but not reading it for a long time, letting it build up, and then when it ended, I was like, okay, time to go back and do the whole thing. So I just read all of it again. Um,
Wow.
yeah, I'm sort of all over the place. I was reading just started reading the second volume of I Am a Hero,
Hmm.
the manga, which is great. Super bizarre, fun, like definitely a different perspective on sort of zombie storytelling in a really fun way. So yeah, I bounce around a lot.
You mentioned Kelly Thompson. Did you get her Deadpool, her new Deadpool?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that
It's
was
so good.
amazing.
So good.
It was very, very good.
Kelly's one of my closest friends, and she's been, we talk almost every day, and she was really nervous about Deadpool and was sort of like keeping it to herself. And then one day she just, messaged me and she was like, "Hey, this is what I'm thinking," and just had like the whole thing. And I was like, "Oh, this is so good," and there's so much stuff in it that I was like, "What is that? Is that a story? Is that an issue?" And she's like, "No, that's just like a page." And I was like, "That's so funny. Like that should be a whole issue of a comic." And she's like, "No, it's just like a panel or a joke." And I was like, "Oh."
Oh man,
She's so funny. She's awesome.
I see. I do see a lot of parallels. I catch similarities between your work and hers. If that's not a rude thing to say, you both write fantastic teams. I think,
Oh,
and yeah. I've always enjoyed that kind of side of yeah, reading your stuff and hers. Yeah, she's one of my favorite writers too.
it's
Definitely.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because when me and Kelly and Ed Brisson were doing X-Men, like Ed is one of the first people I ever met when I was making comics. He's like one of the first friends I ever made. And so we've just been friends forever, and it was the first time we ever co-wrote something. And it was really fun to like write with both of them because we're all really close, and like seeing what our sort of strengths and what our weaknesses are, and like it was really interesting because I would always be like, yeah, I write very a lot like Kelly. And then when we wrote together, I was like, oh, I like the differences are very apparent.
Okay.
But I think that made it fun and cool. And now you know, uh, she said to me the other day, she was like, I think you and Tom Taylor are very similar writers. And I was like, that's weird. I think you and Tom Taylor are very similar writers. And she's
Well,
like,
there could be
yeah, I
something in
guess.
that. Yeah. It
Yeah.
must have been absolutely mind blowing getting to write X Men. If that was such an early influence on you when you were, barely reading age, that must have been incredible.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, I had a real bizarre sort of moment because when I decided, I decided I wanted to make comics like later in life than I think a lot of comics creators. I sort of had another career and was doing other stuff. I worked in the music business
Yeah.
and was kind of trying to get out of it, and was like, well, the only other thing I like as much as music is comics. I guess I'll try and do that. And to me, I was like, I remember saying to myself, like, well, what would my final goal be? Like, what would I want to do? And I was like, well, I guess write X-Men and Star Wars. And then at the same time, I sort of was writing X-Men and Star Wars and was like, oh, I guess I did it. I don't actually know. Like, it's very weird to sort of build towards something and be like,
Yeah.
this will be my career goal, and then just hit it. You're just kind of like, oh, I guess I have to reevaluate a bunch of stuff. And it's been really fun and really exciting. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's a heavy moment when you get asked to write X-Men.
Your
Uh,
path has been so steep. You've sort of shot from indie creation to up there with the big titles in Marvel so quickly. Was that I wondered whether there was like a moment when everything changed and everything started to accelerate, or
yeah, there was. It was actually interesting. I was doing indie books and very early on, I got asked to do a couple shorts at Marvel. I did a 10-page story in Secret Wars Journal, and then I did a Quake one shot, and um, and then sort of nothing. And I was like, well, and I talked to an editor there, John Moyson, who's now an editor at Skybound, and he's a great guy and sort of a really good mentor to creators. And he said to me, he's like, well, there's sort of a trial process. You do a short story to get a one shot, and you do a one shot, and then if that goes okay, maybe you get a mini series, and then you get another, maybe you get an ongoing from there. And he's like, it's all rungs on a ladder. And so I was sort of prepared for that, and so I did these, the short and the one shot, and then sort of sat around for a while, and then they offered me this Kingpin miniseries for
yeah,
Civil War II. Um, and then while I was doing that, it just was like, okay, that's actually going to be an ongoing. There's going to be more issues of that, and also Rocket Raccoon. And then, could you launch this Venom thing? And there was just a ton of stuff really fast. And I just remember being like, when I started at Marvel, I was like, yeah, it takes me about 2.5, 3 weeks to write a script, and then suddenly realizing like, oh, I have to write a script every 4 days, and like this is it, this is sink or swim. Like some people won't be able to do this, and this is where you find out if
yeah,
you're one of the people they can count on to do that, and I can do it. So I, kept getting to work, and there was a point where I was writing seven books, and that was like too many for sure. But it's yeah, I mean, it just sort of builds in a way that like you have to step back because you kind of don't notice it because you're just like, oh, that sounds awesome, yes, I want to do that. Like, oh, I would love to do that. And then suddenly you're like, oh, I'm only going to be able to sleep 4 hours a night for the next month. Like, um you know I remember early on in my career, I met Brian Vaughn, or I was talking to Brian Vaughn. I met him before, and he's really kind and generous and with his time. And he said to me, um, there's a power to saying yes
mm.
to things, to being a guy who's willing to do anything. And he's like, at a certain point, there's a power to saying no, to being a guy who they don't have anymore. And he's like, that's true in anything. Like figure out when you have power by saying yes, and figure out when it turns to you having power by saying no. And that was a big thing. Was like I was like, yeah, I'll say yes to anything. Like I'm just excited to be in the room and be considered. So I was taking on so much stuff just because they were like, can you do this? And I'd be like, yes, I can do it.
Yeah.
Um, so yes, it was sort of quick and overwhelming, and
Yeah.
only in hindsight am I like kind of aware of that. But it was a
Sure.
crazy first year at Marvel for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So my comics history is much shorter than yours. I've only really been deeply into comics for about 3 years,
Okay,
and
awesome.
so your Rocket Raccoon series was the first series I actually chose for myself. That I had a few things that I picked up before then that were recommended by the comic group that I'm in, but Rocket Raccoon was the first thing I actually
Oh,
picked for myself to
oh,
read regularly, and absolutely loved it from the start. You can read my review.
well, thank.
But it's reading that led me to picking up your Secret Warriors series, and that got me. I was absolutely fascinated with that about Karnak. So the way you I just found the thing where he chooses to sit in the middle in the back of the car.
Yeah.
I loved that. Safest place. I loved it. Just loved that. Anyway, sorry, I'm rambling. But reading about Karnak in Secret Warriors led me to be a bit more interested in Humans,
Sure.
and I think they get a little bit sidelined sometimes, if you know what I mean. So
Sure.
it's nice to kind of bring that underdog team forward a little bit. And that led me to Black Bolt, which led me to Christian Ward and his
Yeah.
art, which I have fallen head over heels in love with.
Yeah.
With his work, and so this is a very roundabout way of me asking you if there are other creators, if there are other artists that you would be pleased to have brought forward, if that makes sense, to sort of have raised their profile.
Oh man. Well, I mean, just to, I love Christian Ward stuff. I love Christian. He's just a super kind, awesome guy, and a genius artist.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I feel like anytime you can sort of elevate someone else, it's really awesome when people are like, I discovered this person through you, and or you turned me on to this thing. I think it's like it's sort of one of my favorite things to just be
Cool.
like, expanding people's taste. I mean, every week I sort of go on Twitter and I'm like, these are books I like you should check them out.
Yeah.
Just because I get excited about the things I like, and I want other people to like them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think there's a ton of people. A lot of For me, a big one is a lot of the people. I used to work in a comic book store in New
Yeah.
York, and a bunch of my coworkers make comics now, and we all sort of. I was sort of the first one out of the gate who was really doing it, but um, we all sort of help each other and promote each other. And so, like Tyler Boss, who drew Four Kids Walking to a Bank, and we're
Yeah.
doing an Image book next year called "What's the Furthest Place from Here." Like we worked together for 2 years, and he's a genius and just such an amazing artist and one of my closest friends. And Vita Ayala, we worked together. Danny Lore, who just did Queen of Bad Dreams at Vault, and now is co-writing James Bond that came out this week with
Oh yeah.
Vita. Like the three of us worked together at the store. So like for me, seeing them succeed is really, really like the coolest thing, because I remember all of us sitting in the back of the store being like reading comics and being huge fans, but also being like, I want to be on the other side of this. I want to be doing it. So seeing them do it is like a sort of special thrill for me, for sure.
I was going to ask you a little bit about working in the comic book store, and also a little bit about your because you ran a indie music label. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I was wondering if you had any kind of cherished memories of working in the comic book store. We have lots of special memories and experiences from the store. So yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I loved it. I was sort of the guy who I'd put up the new books on Tuesday and decide sort of what got featured. And um, I was trying to read everything and hand sell everything. But for me, like one of my favorite moments in the store, um, was realizing sort of how much power you have to like people come in and are looking to fall in love with things and
Yeah.
to sort of help them and guide them is like it's a big responsibility in it, but it's an awesome feeling. And when you get those people who are like come back and are like, I loved it. Like
Yeah.
what else? It's my favorite thing. And for me, um, when I started working there, Josh Dysart had written the Unknown Soldier series at Vertigo, which is one of my favorite books. I think it's like just a true modern gem. I think if it had come out 10 years earlier, we'd be talking about it in the same way we talk about, a Swamp Thing or Hellblazer, one of those books, just like a super major work at Vertigo. I think it just came out in a sort of weird period. But I don't think it was a big hit particularly. I don't think it was a book that was on a lot of people's radars, but it's one of my favorites, and it's beautiful, and Alberto Ponticelli art is just stunning, and it feels really important to me. It's like an important book, and I just remember telling the buyer at the store, I was like, always, always, always keep it in stock. This is the book that I want more people reading, and I remember um, people would come in and say what they like, and if they were anywhere near what was crossed over, I'd be like, well, check this out and like give this a chance. And I
Cool.
remember, I think in a month we sold like I checked in like in the 3 years before we'd sold maybe like the store had sold maybe like 6 copies of Volume One, and in a month I sold I think 38 copies of Volume One of Unknown Soldier and a lot of the other volumes. And I remember talking to someone at DC Vertigo, and they were like, "Oh, that was you. Like we noticed that." And like when a book like suddenly is like being reordered and like there's a spike, like someone looks out and goes like, "Why is this happening? What is this?" And they're like, "And we didn't actually know." And I was like, "Oh," and it was like a really cool feeling to be like, "Oh, the publisher noticed that I was
Yeah.
making a difference." And I don't know, it was very exciting for me. But that was is a sort of cherished moment for me
Yeah.
for sure.
I like that.
But
Yeah.
I just like selling comics to people. It's really fun.
And the same, and especially when we have youngsters coming into the shop
Yeah.
as well. That's especially nice for me to be able to kind of think that we've got the next generation of readers coming through, and yeah, I always find that very exciting. It's good
Yeah,
fun.
for
Yeah.
sure.
I'm actually going to sort of jump off what you were saying there about. Did you say Unknown Soldier?
Yes.
So I was going to ask you, as I say, I've not been reading comics regularly for very long, and at the moment I get quite a lot of new comics every week. So
Sure.
I'm tearing open my paper bag on New Comic Book Day on a Wednesday.
Sure.
But I'm also trying to catch up with what I suppose what you'd call the classics, if you see what I mean.
Uh,
So if you could recommend three things that somebody who considers themselves a comic book reader, what should they read? What three things would you say? Like,
I mean, there's sort of the obvious ones that people are always like Watchmen and Sandman and stuff like that. I think my choices are slightly off the beaten path, but to me, I would always say Powers by Brian Bendis and Mike Oeming is sort of
oh
the book that made me.
yeah,
To me, that was a book that like expanded what I thought comics could do in a way that hadn't happened for me in a long time. Where I was just like, oh, this is a meeting of all these different things. It feels really mature, but it's funny and it's like great characters and like it felt like a movie or a TV show in a way, in a great way, and not in a like, well, it's widescreen and big action, but in a like just immersive, getting lost in the world kind of way.
yeah,
And that was a really transformative book for me. Powers for sure. I'm a big Love and Rockets fan. I think anytime uh, Love and Rockets is the kind of book that I feel like should be taught, in any literature class. I think it's what the Hernandez brothers do in those stories is like no one else on earth could do in
yeah,
any medium. And I just think like they're amazing character studies, but there are like bits of sci-fi and bits of romance and comedy and drama and action and crime and all these different elements that fall into it. And it's just comics in this really, like distilled pure way. And I just love it so much. And it's like sprawling and huge and like both like really intimidating in that, but
Oh,
also really comforting in that, because like you enter into the world of Love and Rockets and then you can just stay there. And I've been a fan since I was a kid, and it's still like something that is, every time it comes out, it feels very like reassuring and home to me. Um, that's a big one for me. And I'd say maybe Ex Machina by Brian Vaughan and Tony Harris. That's just one of my favorite books. I think just in terms of execution, I think it's like it's the most I've ever just been like shocked over and over by a book, where you're just like every month your mouth is just open and you're just like, how did they do that? Like, that's insane. Like, I don't know what's going to happen next. And I loved it. It was like, uh, people talk a lot about the TV show Lost and how that was like a cultural phenomenon, because people every week were like, what's happening, what's
yeah.
going on. And that was, to me, that was Ex Machina, like that every month, just, being blown away by the stuff that's developing. So I guess those would be my three. I don't know. If you asked me tomorrow, I'd probably have three different books, but Powers, Ex Machina, and Love and Rockets are like books that I always go back to. But at the same time, like I read Watchmen and Frank Miller's Daredevil and stuff like that all the time. So
Sure. So, yeah, so let's talk about Hawkeye then.
okay,
So I was interested to ask you what you had to do to prepare for writing for Hawkeye.
okay. Well, what I had to do was probably nothing. What I chose to do, I mean, Hawkeye's one of my favorite heroes, and growing up, I was a big Avengers Spotlight, Solo Avengers, which was like the Hawkeye book when I was a kid. They didn't have a book called Hawkeye, but they put out a book that was just basically about Hawkeye and secretly just called it Avengers, whatever. And I loved it. But obviously, like, there's the Matt Fraction, David Aja, Annie Wu run, which, I love and am blown away by. And then Jeff Lemire does his, and Kelly
Yeah.
Thompson does hers. And I read all those and love all those. Um, so in terms of that, like I was pretty good to go. Like I've read all the Hawkeye appearances. I know Hawkeye. I know Clint really well. One of the things I did, which I certainly didn't have to do, but decided to do, is when they greenlit the book, I went out and bought a bow and some arrows.
I saw them on
And
the back of your chair. In
yeah,
the
yeah,
yeah.
I thought it was funny in the chair, but I actually did like. I was like, I do want to know how to do this, and like, I read a lot about archery and sort of watched a lot of tutorials and took a couple lessons, and um, I'm certainly not a good archer, but I was actually in Croatia last month, and there was an archery range, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna go pay, a couple dollars and go shoot some arrows, and I like hit all bullseyes, and it wasn't like super far, and it was a compound bow, but I was like, oh, that was actually kind of, I look like I know what I'm doing, at least to people who don't know what they're doing, and I was like, that's nice. Um, that actually had nothing to do with actually preparing for the book, but I thought like, oh, I should be able to answer this. Like, someone asked me on Twitter once, like, when the book was announced, like, well, what kind of bow is he using? And like a few months ago, I wouldn't have been able to answer that, but I was like, oh, I do know what he's doing, and um, and then the answer is actually I let Otto choose, because he's drawing the book and he stylistically is going to draw what looks nicest. But I think the big thing on like getting ready for the book for me was what Matt and David did on their run of Hawkeye, which is so good. They sort of redefined everything. Like the book is so unique and so interesting and so different from everything else, that it sort of makes it impossible to go back to what a superhero solo book is, but also nobody wants to read me do a bad impression of them. Like
Yeah.
I could do it. I'm so in love with it. I could definitely do my best, and I'm sure Otto could do a great job. But like, that's not what anyone wants. No one wants a Hawkeye cover band.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting to see, because like what Jeff and Kelly did when they wrote Hawkeye after, like they take elements and then they change everything and do a very different kind of book. And so that's sort of the fun challenge of Hawkeye, is that like you have to both love what came before, but also be willing to like reinvent it. Um, you're fixing what's not broken in a lot of ways, which is really hard. It's a hard commitment to make, to be like, this is great, and we're not going to do it. Is a
Yeah.
rough it's a rough sort of concept to go in.
Yeah.
But that was a big thing for me, was like figuring out, spending a lot of time figuring, like studying the other runs that came before and being like, how do we feel unique but not so unique? How do we do something that's different but also doesn't just take it back to what it was? Like, we don't want to reset to just be, no different than a Captain America book or a Daredevil book. And that's a really fun challenge, but it's hard. And that was where a lot of my research and sort of work went in figuring that out. And I think we came to a really happy medium where I think fans of all the previous Hawkeye runs will find stuff that they really like, but I think we're doing something different with the character and with the book and the tone that I think is going to feel exciting to people, I hope.
Great. That sounds fantastic. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm very excited about the comic. I'm very excited to see Otto Schmidt's artwork as well. It's I don't know if you want to just give a little sort of idea of a flavour of what the artwork is going to look like for that.
I mean, it's Otto is amazing. It's funny because when I pitched the book, Hawkeye's sort of a prestige title, and so there's a lot of artists who were like throwing their hats in the ring and want to do it, and a lot of them are awesome artists that I would love to work with. But me and Alana, my editor, just kept coming across artists where we were like, this person is great, and I kept literally sending an email being like, I would do any other book with this person, but I don't think they're right for what I'm trying to do with Hawkeye. Like, this is awesome that this person wants to do this, but like, I just don't think they're a fit. And it was really a struggle, and I felt very picky, but Alana was right there with me, being like, no, it has to be something very unique. And then someone at Marvel was like, what about Otto Schmidt? And I think both of us immediately were just like, is that possible? And they were like, oh, I don't know. And then we were like, well, can we find out? Like, can we get him? And I basically held my breath for 3 weeks while they negotiated with him to do the book. But he's amazing. I mean, he's sort of the perfect artist in a lot of ways. He does everything that I want in a comic. Like, it's first of all, he's penciling, inking, and coloring the whole thing, so it's just other than the lettering, it's just him on the page. But his stuff is like, he does action super well. He does comedy super well. Like, he's incredibly stylized, and so it like really looks unique. But it's not stylized in a way that's off-putting. Like, it feels very much like it fits in the Marvel universe, but it totally stands on its own. And I think like his characters are cool looking and sexy and goofy and funny. I mean, the big thing for me was like, you kind of work with an artist, and it's like, it's sort of like being in a band. Like, you sort of figure out what people are good at and try and lean into that. And it took me more than an issue to be like, oh, he's good at everything. Like, like I was like, his characters, like, they have just funny reactions and funny shots, and I can do them like listening, and it's a great panel. And I was like, but his fight scenes look great. Like, they're just visceral and tough and badass and scary. And then like, he's doing like, Clint just looks awesome, and he's just handsome and cool, and you just think he's neat looking, and so it's just like, I was like, oh, it's pinups, and it's action, it's an action book, and it's a comedy book, and it's and it feels like an indie book, but it feels like a superhero book. I don't know. I'm so in love with it, and I think people are going to be blown away. And like, as we go, I'm sort of figuring out how to write for him better, and he's just getting better with every issue. So like, I always feel terrible where I'm like, the first issue is good, the second issue is better, and the third issue is like much better. But it's true. It's like he's just drawing my favorite stuff every day. Is like, oh, that's my favorite thing in the book. So I'm really excited for people to see it. Even if people find me or my writing annoying, I would say that it's worth picking up just for Otto's art, because it's so good. I semi-jokingly emailed Marvel and was like, we should put out an unlettered version of the book because it's so pretty. And they were like, haha, and I was like, no, I'd totally be down with that. Like, I think it's a really beautiful one.
Don't do that. I'm like a lettering nerd. That's kind of it's just one of my little obsessions, is the lettering. So I'm dying to see what that's like as well.
Yeah. I mean, he tells a great story, and it's funny because he he did a thing that like not a lot of artists will do, and he's going in and adding panels to my scripts. Like I'll be like, oh, it's a 6 panel page or 7 panel page, and it comes back and it's 12 panels,
Whoa.
and I have to sit there and be like, oh, he gave this line its own reaction shot, or he wanted to focus on Clint like saying this, and then it's like I rebuild the page from go, like I'm rewriting things and moving things around to fit what he's done, because it's like, oh, he took like two guys standing around talking to each other and made it like this amazing story without any words, and now I have to rebuild the words to fit that story. It's really awesome. It's like the most fun puzzle to work on. And I think when people, I'm talking about it in very abstract ways, but when you see issue one, I think you'll see what I'm talking about. It's really fun.
I know this is probably a question you've been asked a load of times, but I wondered if there's a character, or particularly I wondered if there's a team, because you're so amazing at writing teams. Is there a team that you still really, really want to write?
Team, the big ones for me, I mean, obviously the Avengers is, you know, real big.
Yeah.
I'm a big New Warriors fan. Like when I was a kid, the New Warriors were like the upstart superheroes who were like
Yeah.
badass and tough in a funny in a quirky way that I really like, and I sort of have always gravitated towards them, like Speedball and Night Thrasher and Nova and Namorita, Firestar, like that New Warriors team for me. I'm a big fan of. Teams there aren't. I love the Guardians. I'd like to write the Guardians at
Oh,
some
cool.
point. Rocket is fun, but I think Rocket is at his best when he's with Groot and Peter and Gamora. Like
Totally.
there's such a good chemistry there that
Yeah.
that is really like sort of a dream to get to write.
I would be
Uh,
100% there for that. Definitely.
uh,
Take my money.
uh,
That would be
uh,
so great.
Guardians is in good hands for now. Donnie's finishing up his run, and then Al Ewing's taking it, and I know what Al's doing, and it's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
The Annihilation event that I just wrote that's coming out now, parts of that connect to sort of what Al's going to be doing in Guardians. So like we worked closely, and I'm really excited for his Guardians. Um, in terms of characters, I mean, for me, the big ones are, Daredevil, Moon Knight are
Hmm.
like guys I've written, but like would love to spend more time with. Captain America. Um, I would love to do a Quake solo book. That's like a dream book for me. I just love her as a character, and I feel like
Yeah.
she's a pretty new character comparatively to everyone else. But I think she's one of Marvel's best and most underappreciated, and I would love to just have a book called Quake and really elevate her.
Cool.
Um, that's a big one for me for sure.
The boys at the comic book group that I was at yesterday, we had our monthly meet yesterday, and I was saying, what do I ask him? What do I ask him? What do I ask him? And they said, "I'll ask him. If there were three characters that you could go out for a beer with. I don't know if you drink beer, or
I don't,
is coffee or
I don't
for
drink coffee either.
Yeah.
I'll milkshakes. We'll say
Okay,
milkshake.
Oh yes, of course, milkshake. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Which three characters would you choose to go out for a milkshake with?
Oh, that's a tough one because it's not like who do you like the most? Who do you okay. Uh Clint Barton. I think Clint is funny and nice and charming. Um I'm gonna say Captain America, Steve Rogers.
Cool.
We all need a like someone to look up to. Um huh, it's two.
Mm.
Um like a lot of the people I like are like kind of a bummer. In my head, I'm like the Scarlet Witch, and then I'm like, I actually don't want to actually wouldn't want to know the Scarlet Witch. She's terrifying, but like she's just cool, and it would be cool. I mean, the obvious answer is like you always want to go out with Iron Man because he's going to pay for all your meals. Um, uh, that's actually my secret at Marvel is that I go out with all the other Marvel writers, and I manage to step away for a phone call or go duck into the bathroom when the check comes. They're starting to figure it out. Nick Spencer has definitely figured out that I've never paid for a meal with him, but like a lot of the other guys have. I still have probably a couple of years on Scotty Young, Jason Aaron, like those guys buying me dinner. Um, but I don't actually know if I'd want to hang out with Tony. Like he
Yeah.
seems like a jerk.
Yeah.
I like reading his comic, but like Who wants to hang out with like a rich jerk like that? Oh man, this is tough. You know, I'm gonna say Howard the Duck.
Yes.
I would say I think Howard the Duck. I mean, Howard the Duck is a jerk like Tony in a lot of ways, but he has a right to be. He's like an anthropomorphic duck trapped here, and he's not rich.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think Howard the Duck. Me, Hawkeye, Howard the Duck, and Captain America having milkshakes. I think is like a good day out. Now I feel weird about it's all guys. That feels weird to me.
And a duck.
Well, yeah, he's a male dog.
Yeah, true. Yeah. No, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's it.
I feel great about that.
That's okay.
It's kind of well, whatever. We're sticking with that. It's a truly like you read it. I remember reading Howard the Duck as a kid and being like, "This is crazy. I can't believe they're doing this." And then as an adult, like going back and being like, "Oh my god!" Like it's crazy on a different level as an adult, where you're like, "Why did they do this? This is so weird." But it's great. I love Howard the Duck.
Is there anything else you wanted to add other than go buy this comic?
No, I mean I feel like that's pretty good. Hawkeye is in stores January 1st. I think someone told me in the UK it's January 2nd because January 1st is a bank holiday.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So, stay off the internet January 1st if you don't want things spoiled. But no, I mean, I'm doing Force Works in February for Marvel, and Annihilation is wrapping up now. I'm very excited about it. If people want to pick that up, and then
I got
have
that
a new image
yesterday, so I have the Nova Annihilation Scourge Nova from yesterday. So yeah.
Well, I hope you enjoy it. Nova's really like one of my favorite characters to write, so it was very fun.
Great.
But yeah, pick up comics, not just my comics. Pick up lots of people's comics. There's a lot of awesome comics. That's about it.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time, Matt. It's been wonderful. Fantastic.
Awesome. Yeah.
All right.
I really appreciate it.
So I hope you enjoyed the interview. As you'll have seen, Matt's a big fan of local comic book stores, and we'll be heading down to our local comic book store, Paradox Comics in Poole in the UK, to pick up our copy of Hawkeye Freefall. It would be great to see you there too, or maybe order from your local comic book store. Thanks very much.